Often when a video game is a pathetic, dismal, abject failure, the publisher behind it will try and hide that fact. They'll pretend that everything's all okay. No, it's just an outraged internet mob who just hates on everything. Our game is doing totally fine. You can't see the real metrics. Don't talk about mostly negative Steam reviews. We're talking the real metrics that show that all the players are secretly loving it. Everything's all okay. That sort of story plays out time and time again, but with Suicide Squad, it was different. Warner Brothers, the publisher, they didn't even really try and pretend. They came out pretty much immediately and just said, yes, this game failed, it sucked, it hasn't done very well, it has not met expectations. And now rumors are starting to do the rounds, very predictably, that Warner Brothers Discovery discussing shutting Rocksteady, the studio behind Suicide Squad, the Justice League, after the disaster. And as this website mentions, Sweet Baby Inc. did do some work on the game, so it is yet another title that Sweet Baby Inc. consulted for, and the game failed miserably. No one liked it. There was very little positive to say about it. I bring this up because you might be familiar with Jason Schreier. He's considered the leading video game journalist, investigator. He's written a number of books on the industry. He's a reporter at Bloomberg. And what I'll say about him is when he talks about something that's maybe objective, it's got a true or a false answer. An example might be, if he says so-and-so studio is going to release a game at the end of the year, I'll generally trust that because I think he is one of the more reliable leakers. I do think he has genuine sources, contacts in the industry. He's usually quite reliable there. My problem with him starts whenever he talks about anything that has any sort of nuance. This includes the investigations he does into games being made, different studios. Every single time, it feels politically motivated. He always seems to come to the exact same conclusion, which is, the reason the video game failed is purely because of a handful of executives at the top. None of the people actually working on the game day in and day out, none of them are to blame at all. They're totally innocent. It's always management's fault. And he says that every time. Now, some of that may be true. I mean, it's no secret in the industry that a lot of the time you get these incompetent managers. They demand the world from their teams. It's unrealistic. And a lot of these managers, they're kind of in the middle. They're telling the CEO, we can do this. We can deliver it in this time. I promise. Please believe me so I can keep my job and big salary. And then puts all that stress and all those promises onto the team itself. There's probably some truth in that. However, the way Jason always presents it, it just comes across that he doesn't really care deep down about getting to the truth of this. He just wants a story that backs up his own political opinions and worldviews. We see this all the time across the entire industry. These games get made, and it feels like the team's goal was not to make a quality video game that we could all love and cherish. It was more about promoting 2024 politics, a certain side of politics, re-educate people. It feels like a lot of games are made with that intent in mind. So that's kind of how I feel about Jason Schreier, and he's done another story very, very recently. And that story was about what went wrong with Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. This is the story based on interviews with 24 people who worked on the game of how Rocksteady Studios went from the revered Arkham series to a $200 million flop. Now again, there's not many people actually investigating these sort of disasters. Jason's one of the few who are doing it. Every single time, though, there's always this where he spoke to a couple of dozen people, and while it's great that, again, he's got these contacts, my problem is if you know Jason, you know he leans incredibly heavily to one side of the political aisle, and if you interact with him on Twitter, on X, at any time, if you say something he doesn't like, if you disagree with him, he'll ban you immediately. You can't interact with him again. So I have to wonder, these 25 or so people that he actually spoke to, are these just all people who are in total agreement with him? They're willing to speak to him, probably put their future careers in jeopardy because if they're leaking stories, other developers probably won't want to hire them. If they're willing to do that, it makes me think that they're probably totally on board with everything that Jason does and says. And they've probably got their own agenda at mind. These are people who are probably just working in the studio as an artist, maybe as a programmer or something. They don't necessarily know the goings-on of the wider studio, the challenges that the game designers are going through and so on. But they'll give their opinion. They'll tell Jason and then he'll write his story. So maybe everything in the article is true, but I just wonder about the integrity of this story, because it just seems like to me that Jason always has the conclusion of one of his stories ready to go before he's maybe even really conceived it. It seems like every single time, Crunch is to blame, no other real nuance to it other than that. It's always Crunch. A handful of people destroyed this game, while the hundreds of people actually working day in and day out, they did nothing wrong. They wanted to make something incredible, but they weren't allowed. It always just seems to go that way. And what follows from him posting this story is where things get quite interesting. So someone replies to him posting the story and says, not one mention of the woke tone turning off fans or Sweet Baby Inc. influence. Really, Jason? Now, this is true because what the article basically boils down to is blaming a lot of people who are no longer actually at Rocksteady. It calls out the previous founders of Rocksteady, and keep in mind, they were the brains behind the Arkham trilogy. So if you like Rocksteady, it's probably because of those guys. They're kind of blamed. I think they wanted to make some other weird multiplayer puzzle game, and then that got canned or something, and then eventually they moved on to Suicide Squad. That's part of the reason it's been like 9 years since they released Arkham Knight, but it blames those guys, it blames other members of the leadership team. Where I find it's a little bit fishy is we know Jason has his industry contacts, we know he's got his political agendas. It almost seemed like damage control to me, where it was kind of trying to say, hey, no one at Rocksteady now is to blame for the problems, so Warner Brothers, don't shut them down because I'm an advocate for the industry and I want to protect all of my friends. If he wants to do that, that's fine, but it's not really being objective about what went wrong with Suicide Squad. That's my issue there. He certainly doesn't mention Sweet Baby Inc. I will get to my thoughts on that, because I'm not even saying that Sweet Baby Inc. are the reason it failed or the game sucks or anything like that, but I just find it interesting that despite all the talk of his investigations, it doesn't appear objective to me, and someone did kind of call him out. Like, you mentioned a lot of other potential issues. You left them out of the article. Well, Jason replies to that comment of not one mention of the woke tone turning off fans. Really, Jason? And he says, this article is about what actually happened. And a lot of people love this. People who've always tried to proclaim, oh no, Sweet Baby Inc. are totally innocent. It's just the outrage gamers. They can't stop. They're always looking for the boogeyman. People who are on board with that sort of thought process, they loved Jason's comment. And the original commenter comes back and says, right, so it didn't have any effect on development behind the scenes, hiring practices, or turning off millions of fans. Are you saying that Sweet Baby Inc. had nothing to do with that? Do you not remember this game is what kicked off the Sweet Baby Inc. drama to begin with? To not even mention it is negligent, absent journalism, dishonestly so. And then Jason replies, I asked 24 people who worked on the game what went wrong, and not a single one mentioned the word Sweet Baby. You were chasing angry hallucinations created by grifters who make money off your rage. So my problem with this exchange, I've mentioned my opinions on Jason, don't really like him personally, but I do believe that he is a reputable industry insider. He's probably a good communicator, a genuine writer too, and often when people are good communicators, good writers, when they get into arguments, they will sound credible and they'll come off as winning the argument. Because, I mean, who is he up against? Random Twitter user, basically. That's who I assume this Justin person is. So Justin's just giving his opinion, that's it. And then Jason, in the public sphere, he's in the public-facing space, he comes right back at him and argues with him. And 9 times out of 10, no matter what the argument is, Jason is probably going to win because he's got that experience. The issue I have with that, it doesn't actually mean that Jason is right. Even if he writes something that sounds credible, it sounds really good, and everyone goes, oh, you've wrecked him, Jason, take a bow. It doesn't really mean he's right, and I can acknowledge, reading this argument, this exchange, Jason absolutely sounds like the person who's in the right here. He comes back with that witty comment, this article is about what actually happened. and then he starts talking about Sweet Baby Inc., you are chasing angry hallucinations, blah, blah, blah. My issue with the whole exchange is it just comes across as totally disingenuous. Jason seems like he picked out a comment that was an easy target. And I do see this a lot with people who are against Sweet Baby Inc. Sometimes they might miss the point a little bit, where they think that Sweet Baby Inc. is genuinely the core reason why all of these games are bad. That if Sweet Baby Inc. wasn't there, the game would be fantastic. If we just get rid of Sweet Baby Inc., the industry will be totally fine. Unfortunately, that's a bit of a black and white way of looking at it, because what I see as the big root of the problem is that a studio would hire a Sweet Baby Inc. in the first place. And you can talk about ESG funding and requirements, all of that, and you can say, oh, the studios hire them so they can get funding. I think that that's wishful thinking. I think that the problem has gone way far beyond that. I believe that most studios who hire Sweet Baby Inc. do it because they like hiring consultants and people who basically just back them up and believe in the same things that they do. Most of these studios, they love what Sweet Baby Inc. has to say. They agree with them completely. They're all on the same political spectrum. The studios themselves, they're essentially corrupted with people, and it's not really the political beliefs. I think people should be free to think what they want. It's more about you injecting these beliefs into the games and thinking that your political beliefs are so objectively correct, there's no nuance at all. If people don't agree with you, they're evil, that they're wrong. It's that they put all of that into the game, and they use the game as a vehicle to try and essentially re-educate people. It feels like. The game suddenly has no integrity. It exists as a political tool, essentially, not as a fun piece of entertainment, which is what we want. There's always that straw man of old people say they don't want games to be political. What they mean by that is that they just want a game that isn't pushing one side of the political spectrum, making you feel like a bad person if you don't agree. There's many great games that are political, plenty of role-playing games, for instance, but they usually explore different sides of politics, and you can make choices, and there's not always a right or a wrong answer. It's more nuanced. It's actually quite interesting, and if we come back to the argument Jason is having with the Twitter user, it's an easy target for Jason because the person basically says, why didn't you write in your article about Suicide Squad how Sweet Baby Inc. caused a whole bunch of problems, turned fans off the game? Jason is never going to acknowledge that as a problem. The dozen or so people who work at the studio, they're not going to suggest that that is a problem. Because all these people, they share the same political beliefs on an extreme level. They think that these things going into the game, they're a necessity. They are an asset. They have to go in there. The game shouldn't even exist if we're not using it to push a certain message, because that's their responsibility, is what they think, is they need to show, especially young people, how they should be thinking going forward. There's only one right way of thinking, otherwise you're in the wrong. They don't see it as a problem, so if you bring that up, Jason says this article is about what actually happened. The issue is his reasoning's always going to come back to something to the effect of capitalism bad. That's the reason that this title failed. He's implying that he's there to get an objective look at absolutely everything, but we just know from his past experience that that isn't going to be true. He's not going to be looking at things like, let's step back. Have Rocksteady for the last 9 years been focused more on, say, diversity hires, instead of hiring people specifically focused on merit? Because if you're not doing the latter, over time there's going to be issues with the culture, there's going to be issues with actually getting the work done. No wonder that management is going to run into problems when they don't have the right team members and they can't do anything about it. Because, oh no, we didn't follow the DEI methodology. That's what's most important. None of these things are seen as problems to Jason, and the issue is some people at least see him as being the most credible video game investigator. He says this is what happens, but people need to realize that his opinion of things is just totally warped by his political beliefs. He lets the two of these things get conflated and sort of mushed up together. What he's providing in the article, I don't trust it. And he can wreck a person on Twitter and say, this is what happened, you need to realize that you're being brainwashed by people online about Sweet Baby Inc. I'll tell you this, most people making videos about Sweet Baby Inc., they're just serving the audience. Because the audience, a portion of video gamers, can feel that something has become rotten in the industry, that people just really feel like games are not about fun anymore, they're about pushing something, there's just something nefarious going on, and that's why they're looking for videos calling out Sweet Baby Inc. Again, I don't think that Sweet Baby Inc. is the actual root of the problem. I think it is that these teams have become so corrupted by people who only look at things one way. They're usually on one side of the political spectrum, and all of those people together, they make crap products. They're not focused on the right things, what make games fun, and those teams happen to hire consultancies like Sweet Baby Inc. In an ideal world, you can absolutely start a business like Sweet Baby Inc. It's a free country, you can do what you want, but ideally, not many people would hire them at all. A very small, select amount of studios would hire them. Sensible people could avoid those studios, and we could go, yep, thanks, we won't be playing that. We can steer clear. A few niche, a few weirdos can play those sorts of titles. We can play everything else that is quite normal. Unfortunately, it's gone the other way, the complete opposite way, where it feels like most games, most studios are infected with this crap, and you've got to kind of play Where's Wally and find the few studios who don't have this nonsense in there. So Jason, again, he just feels kind of corrupt in this part of things for me. Again, if he has a rumor about a game coming out, I'll trust him. Anything to do with his investigations talking about Sweet Baby Inc., it's totally false. He tries to convince people that he's in the know. Sweet Baby Inc., it's the boogeyman. No, it's that the teams themselves already have this mindset in there. And I do think that just the Sweet Baby Inc. kind of mindset is part of the reason that Suicide Squad failed. I don't think it's the best game to sort of point at and say, look, this is what Sweet Baby Inc. does, this sort of thinking does, because it's got so many other problems. The live service aspects, the crap content, the story problems, all of that sort of shit. And because of that, maybe pointing the finger at Sweet Baby Inc. doesn't sort of help so much. You're probably better off looking at a game that could have been great, but it was ruined by Sweet Baby Inc. I mean, if I think of the Silent Hill 2 remake, if I'm brutally honest, just seeing like the gameplay and maybe going through an area, a bit of the story, I don't actually think it's the worst thing in the world. It could have been a lot worse. I say that as someone who loves Silent Hill 2. I hate Bloober Team. I don't really like any of their games. I didn't think overall it looked that bad until I saw some of those character models. And that's where I realized you're taking something that could have been good and you're totally spoiling it with weird thinking about changing the character models for modern audiences and, oh my god, an attractive woman could kill feminism. We've got to change all of this up. That actually makes me angrier than Sweet Baby Inc. working on Suicide Squad, because it was a turd already. Who cares? It's just the icing on the shit sandwich, essentially. And if you think I'm too biased on Jason or I'm not being truthful, if you just have a look at some of his other work, for instance, it's pretty wild, he said back in 2021, that a new game studio will look like this. And it's a team of white men, essentially. I don't even know if they are all white men, but they just appear to have white skin, so Jason automatically labels them as definitely white, and this is bad, this is evil. Back in the day, I used to have a podcast that was just two dudes. It was good. Then we added a woman. It got exponentially better. Turns out different perspectives improve your product. In other words, anyone who responds with, all that matters is game quality, is getting blocked. This is the guy's kind of mindset, and given he's always getting on a high horse about this stuff, someone actually called him out back then and mentioned existing while white and having a job at a game studio. Let's jump on that story ASAP. Sexual miscontent at a game studio? This can wait. And this was back in the day when Blizzard started to get investigated for all the sexual issues that were happening in the workplace, people stealing breast milk and all of that. And Jason himself says, truth is, I've heard several stories about sexism and sexual misconduct at Blizzard over the past few years. Needless to say, we'll be reporting more on this. If you work or worked at Blizzard and would like to share your story confidentially, please contact me. So it's quite interesting that he knew about that for years, felt it wasn't worth talking about. But yet, oh my goodness, there's a game studio and everyone's got white skin. This is a story. This is a big story. That seems to always be his mindset. So it seems to me that Jason's articles, his investigations, they're pretty much all politically motivated, and the whole exchange about Sweet Baby Inc. being the boogeyman and so on, He basically got into that argument because he wanted to try and use his credibility as a video game journalist to pretend that he's debunked the whole Sweet Baby Inc. thing. And he might fool some people, but if you actually know what's kind of going on, you realize that all these video game companies, they're basically all Sweet Baby Inc. All these studios, they're infested with people who are on board with that ideology. If you understand that, you start to realize that pretty much everything Jason is saying is a load of nonsense. It might make for a funny read, but that is literally about it. The Sweet Baby Inc. mindset, it is a genuine problem. It's ruined games. It continues to ruin games. And gaming itself will be a lot better when people just focus on making a quality video game for entertainment first. Thanks so much for listening. I'll see you on the next one. Cheers. Bye.